and my older sister Leslie, who lives in Australia, and the last count, 8 children. So she's keeping it all going in her way, you know. Yes, Leslie, me, and Mom.
He was the voice behind the biggest disco anthems the world has ever known. Barry Gibb is 79 now, and when you look at his life today, it feels completely different from the world he once ruled. Back then, with the Bee Gees, everything was loud, bright, and full of life. The music, the crowds, the energy, it never seemed like it would end. But now, his world looks nothing like it used to. And maybe the hardest part isn't the silence, but who's missing from it. His brothers were everything to him, and losing them changed everything. Join us as we get into the heartbreaking details, the losses, the memories, and what it really means to be the last Bee Gee. The making of the Bee Gees. Before the fame, before the global recognition, before the name Bee Gees meant anything to the world, starts in a place most people wouldn't expect. It starts in post-war Manchester, where life for Barry Gibb and his family was shaped more by survival than comfort. Barry was born in 1946 into a home that was constantly adjusting to uncertainty. His father worked different jobs just to keep income coming in, while his mother tried to hold the family together as they moved from place to place. There was no sense of stability. Life felt temporary, like it could shift at any moment without warning. And before Barry could even form clear memories of childhood, something happened that almost ended his life. As a toddler, he pulled a hot teapot onto himself and suffered severe burns. He spent a long time in the hospital recovering, and at one point, doctors believed he might not survive. But he did. The unusual part is that Barry has no memory of the event at all. No images, no feelings, nothing he can recall. It is as if that part of his early life was erased, leaving only physical scars and second-hand stories from others. That early experience became a quiet marker in his life, proof that survival was never guaranteed. As the years passed, stability never really arrived. The family kept moving, always looking for better conditions, better chances, something more secure. Then, in 1958, everything shifted again when they left England and migrated to Australia under an assisted scheme. It was not a move driven by ambition. It was driven by necessity. But that decision became one of the most important turning points in modern music history. In Australia, far from the environment they knew, Barry and his younger twin brothers, Robin and Maurice, slowly began to develop a shared interest in music. It was not planned as a career. It was something that grew naturally out of their daily lives. They sang together, practiced together, and slowly started understanding how their voices could fit together in a way that felt distinct. Music was not yet a profession for them. It was a form of expression in a life that had very little stability. At the beginning, there was nothing glamorous about it. No major audiences, no recognition, no expectation of success. They performed wherever they could. Small local events, modest gatherings, and informal settings where people might pause long enough to listen. These early performances were not about perfection. They were about persistence. Over time, what started as simple singing between brothers became something more structured, something with direction. By the early 1960s, they officially became the Bee Gees. Recognition began slowly at first. Their early songs started circulating, and people began noticing something different in their sound. Tracks like Massachusetts and I've Gotta Get a Message to You carried a tone that was softer and more emotional than many other groups at the time. Their harmonies felt tightly connected, almost like they were built from shared understanding rather than performance technique. Behind the group's growing success, Barry was becoming a central creative force. He was not only performing as a lead vocalist, but also writing a large portion of their material. This meant he carried a double responsibility, shaping the sound of the group while also managing the expectations that came with rising popularity. Writing songs at that level requires constant creative output, and doing it while balancing relationships within a family group adds another layer of pressure. Decisions about direction were not just artistic, they were personal. As the 1970s approached, their popularity continued to grow, but the biggest change came in 1977 with the release of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. That moment transformed everything. The Bee Gees were no longer just a successful band. They became a global presence. Their music was played across clubs, radio stations, films, and public spaces almost everywhere. Songs like Stayin' Alive and Night Fever became part of everyday life for millions of people. Barry's voice also became instantly recognizable during this period, especially his falsetto. It was not just a style choice anymore. It became a defining sound that set the group apart. When people heard it, they knew immediately who it was. That level of recognition is rare, and it placed the Bee Gees in a very small category of artists who shaped an entire era of music. The scale of their success was enormous. Hundreds of millions of records sold, multiple awards, and repeated #1 hits. But those figures only tell part of the story. They do not show the pressure that builds behind constant expectation, or the emotional strain that comes from maintaining such a high level of output over time. Because, as success increased, so did internal pressure. Creative disagreements began to appear more frequently. Each brother had his own ideas, direction, and emotional response to the demands of fame. When family and work are the same thing, disagreements do not stay small. They grow quickly and affect everything around them. And slowly, what had once been a natural collaboration between brothers began to feel more complicated. The harmony that once came easily started to face challenges that could not be solved by talent alone. That is where the story begins to shift away from pure success and into something more complicated, something shaped by pressure, change, and the emotional weight of holding everything together while the world keeps watching. And just as the Bee Gees reached the highest point of global success, the pressure building behind the scenes began to quietly pull their world in a very different direction, from struggle to breakthrough. In 1958, the Gibb family left England on the ship Fair Sea, not for adventure, but because life had become financially unbearable. They moved under an assisted migration scheme to Australia, hoping things would simply be easier. But even there, survival didn't stop. Money was still tight, and the boys had to sing anywhere they could get attention. At small events, local shows, and even between races at the Red Cliff Speedway. That was the reality behind the early version of the Bee Gees. No spotlight yet, just effort. During these early years, something started to stand out in Barry Gibb. He wasn't just singing like the others, he was already writing songs that felt more structured, more intentional, even at a young age. A radio DJ named Bill Gates noticed this early talent and gave them one of their first real moments of recognition on air. It wasn't fame, but it mattered. It confirmed that Barry's songwriting had direction, not just curiosity. By 1961, Barry made a decision that changed the entire path of the group. He left school completely to focus on music full-time. That was a serious move for someone his age, especially with no guarantee of success. Around this time, the family moved again to Surfer's Paradise, and the brothers started performing in hotels and clubs across the Gold Coast. These were long nights with repeated sets, often in front of audiences who weren't always paying attention. But this is where they learned control, how to keep people listening even when conditions weren't perfect. In 1963, things started to shift. They signed with Festival Records, and for the first time, Barry's songwriting moved beyond just their performances. Other artists began recording his work. That is an important point because it showed his writing had value outside their own group. By 1966, he had already received recognition for his composition. The progress was steady, not explosive, but it created pressure underneath everything. Expectations were growing faster than the group's ability to fully process them. Then, in 1967, everything changed again. The family returned to the United Kingdom. Almost immediately, they signed with Robert Stigwood and released Spicks and Specks. That song opened doors they had never accessed before. Soon after, To Love. Somebody pushed Barry into a stronger position as both lead vocalist and primary songwriter for the Bee Gees. At this point, they were no longer a regional act. They were becoming international. However, success only comes at a price. In the same year, Barry and Robin both passed out from weariness as they were flying from Australia to Turkey. Both of them were traveling from Australia to Turkey. At that very moment, a significant realization came to light. The rate at which they were working was not a sustainable pace. Constantly writing, recording, and performing were no longer merely creative demands. Rather, they were becoming a source of physical pressure on their bodies. Throughout the year 1969, the internal tensions had reached a point of no return. The differences of opinion on the selection of tracks for the Odessa album led to a significant rift. Robin was under the impression that his contribution was being disregarded, particularly when Barry's song 1st of May was chosen over his tune Lamplight. As a result of the upheaval that was caused by that choice, Robin departed the organization. At that very moment, the Bee Gees were no longer able to perform as a trio for the very first time. Later on, Robin released a solo album titled Robin's Reign, which featured the song Saved by the Bell, which became a smash in the United Kingdom. It was successful, but it did not manage to attain the same level of success as the Bee Gees' earlier efforts. In the meantime, Barry and Maurice attempted to stick together as a duo. On the other hand, something was lacking. The equilibrium had been depleted. There was a noticeable change in the music, and more crucially, the identity of the group did not appear to be stable anymore. There was a long stretch of time during which it appeared as though the group would be finished. There were discussions on careers that are pursued by women. Absence of a unified path. There is no obvious plan for moving forward. The momentum that they had been building up over the course of years abruptly slowed down. It was hardly an instantaneous reunion that brought them back together. There was a slower pace than that. The process of communication gradually resumed throughout the course of time. When compared to working together, the concept of working independently began to feel awkward and unnatural. Without making any public declarations or having any dramatic moments, they gradually went back to having sessions together and abandoned their aspirations to go solo. Once they finally got around to recording How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, it was a turning point in their career. This is not a restart, but rather a continuation under different circumstances. Even though the group was in the process of rebuilding, the fissures that had been caused by past decisions were still visible beneath the surface. And just when it appeared that the Bee Gees were beginning to regain their footing after their initial collapse, another chapter of their journey was already beginning to take shape. This phase would propel them into a completely different sort of success, as well as even more intense strain. Love, loss, and the weight of family. Before life settled into any kind of stability, Barry Gibb went through a short first marriage with Maureen Bates in 1966. It didn't last long. By 1970, it had ended. At that time, Barry was still very young, still figuring out who he was, and still moving through a fast-changing world built around the rising success of the Bee Gees. Everything around him was shifting at once. Career pressure, constant travel, expectations from the industry, and the emotional weight of growing fame. But in 1967, something different entered his life. Barry met Linda Gray while she was working as a hostess on Top of the Pops. It wasn't a dramatic or staged meeting. It was ordinary, brief, simple. But Barry later described it as something that stayed with him immediately. They spoke near a Doctor Who set, and what he remembered wasn't excitement or noise, it was calm, a feeling that didn't need explanation or proof. They married on September 1st, 1970, Barry's 24th birthday. That timing mattered. It came at a moment when his life was already moving quickly in every direction. From that point on, Linda became a steady presence in a world that rarely slowed down. Together, they built a family with 5 children: Stephen, Ashley, Travis, Michael, and Alexandra. Some of their children later followed creative paths, especially in music, continuing a quieter version of the family's artistic life. As the Bee Gees' success grew, so did the pressure on Barry's daily life. Touring schedules, recording demands, and constant public attention meant he was rarely in one place for long. In that kind of life, everything becomes performance, even routine conversations, even rest. But home was different. Home with Linda became the one place that didn't ask him to perform anything at all. Over time, Linda's role wasn't about being in the spotlight. It was about keeping things steady when everything outside became overwhelming. She became the person Barry could return to when the pressure of the music industry felt too heavy. Not as part of the fame, but as a break from it. But even strong stability doesn't stop loss from entering a family. The first major shock came in 1988, when Andy Gibb, Barry's youngest brother, died at just 30 years old. Andy had experienced his own rise to fame in the late 1970s, but behind that success was a long and difficult struggle with addiction and health issues. His death hit Barry deeply. He has spoken about carrying guilt and wondering if more could have been done. But what made it harder was that Andy wasn't just a public figure in music. He was family. He grew up in the same fragile environment that shaped all the brothers. That loss changed something permanent in Barry's personal life. It wasn't just grief, it was reflection. It made him look back at everything that fame had brought into their family, including the parts that were never visible to the public. Then came another loss in 2003. Maurice Gibb passed away at 53 after complications from intestinal surgery. He had been rushed into the hospital, and Barry and Robin were with him during his final moments. Maurice had always been the quiet balance in the group, the one who helped smooth tensions when Barry and Robin disagreed. His absence didn't just affect the family emotionally, it changed the structure of the Bee Gees itself. After Maurice died, the group no longer functioned as a trio in any real sense. From that point, everything felt different. The balance that once existed between the brothers was gone. The last loss happened in the year 2012, when Robin Gibb, who had been battling cancer and pneumonia, passed away at the age of 62. Something that had not been anticipated had taken place in the years leading up to his passing. Barry and Robin had resumed their collaboration in the performing arts. This is not a complete return to the past. Rather, it is a gradual reconnection through the medium of music. Just a few weeks before Robin died, Barry even shared the stage with him to perform. This particular thing is significant because it wasn't a long-term loss. It was quite close, not absent, still taking place at the time it took place. Following the passing of Robin Gibb, Barry Gibb became the first and only member of the original trio to continue on. There is a weight that comes with that position that cannot be evaluated in terms of prizes or accomplishments. On stage, he is a representation of the past. Memory is something he carries off stage. All of the things that they constructed together are now only accessible through him, despite the fact that it was never developed by a single individual. Through all of these years, Linda has remained a consistent presence in our lives. As the private support that kept everything together, while loss kept coming back, rather than as a public person in the story of the Bee Gees, she was the one who supported them. It was not about fame or attention that she was playing. In a life that was shaped by interruptions, it was about maintaining continuity. In many respects, her presence turned out to be the unassuming framework that underpinned Barry's life. When everything else changed, including music, popularity, and the death of a family member, she remained unmoved. The quiet after the applause. Today, Barry Gibb lives a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels very different when you look closely at how it actually moves day to day. He and his wife, Linda, live in a large waterfront estate on North Bay Road in Miami Beach, a place known for privacy and distance from public attention. The house is huge, over 16,000 square feet, with multiple rooms, wide open spaces, and its own waterfront access. On paper, it looks like everything someone could want. But space like that does not automatically mean life feels full. Inside the home, the story of the Bee Gees is still present in a very physical way. Gold records are displayed on walls, marking decades of success. Old photographs show different moments in time, early performances, award nights, and rare family images when all three brothers were still together. Musical instruments are also still there, not stored away, but kept close, like part of the house itself. They are not there for show. They are reminders that music never really left Barry's life. It just stopped being something shared on a stage. Barry's daily routine is far from the life most people imagine when they think of global fame. There are no tours, no schedules built around audiences, no pressure to perform on demand. Mornings are often quiet. Sometimes he writes music, but not with expectations attached. There is no pressure for hits or chart positions anymore. Sometimes he simply listens to music instead of creating it. Over time, music has shifted from being a public job to something personal, almost like a private conversation with memory. Family still plays an important role in his life. When his children and grandchildren visit, the house changes completely. It becomes active, full of movement, conversation, and energy again. In those moments, the estate feels closer to what it might have once been imagined for, life shared, not just observed. But when they leave, the quiet returns. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a steady one that has become part of his routine. At 79, Barry also lives with the physical changes that come with age. He has dealt with hip-related issues that affect how easily he moves. He still walks and stays active, but his movements are more careful than they once were. These changes are not dramatic in a public sense, but they matter in everyday life. They shape how he moves through space, how he spends his time, and how he experiences each day at a slower rhythm than before. What makes his home especially meaningful is the contrast it holds. On one side, it represents everything the Bee Gees achieved: global recognition, decades of success, and a musical legacy that still reaches new listeners today. On the other side, it reflects absence. The same rooms that hold awards and memories also hold silence, shaped by the fact that the people he built everything with are no longer there. That contrast is not something hidden in his life. It is present in small details. A photo frame in one room. A guitar was left in another place. A song playing in the background that once would have been created together, not listened to alone. Even success, when it becomes part of memory instead of daily creation, starts to feel different. It becomes something you carry rather than something you are actively building. Barry has often been described as someone who keeps music close, even in stillness. He does not treat it as something finished or distant. It remains part of his environment, part of how he thinks and remembers. But there is a difference between hearing music and sharing it. The recordings still exist, but the original trio that created them does not. That gap cannot be replaced by time or achievement. The estate itself reflects that same reality. Large rooms that once might have felt full of activity now function in a quieter rhythm. Spaces that were designed for a different stage of life now support a more reflective one. Yet this is not isolation. Linda remains a steady presence, and their shared routines, walking, talking, and spending time together, create structure in a life that could otherwise feel too still. Her presence is not about fame or history. It is about continuity. The aspect of Barry's life that jumps out the most during this time is not luxury, but rather adjustment. Neither is he attempting to disengage himself from the past, nor is he attempting to relive the events that occurred in the past. The two of them are living together. The past is still present in the form of things, memories, and routines, but it is static and does not go forward. What he sees next to him is something that has already been finished. In the annals of music history, the Bee Gees continue to be a force to be reckoned with, even now. Songs continue to be discovered by new generations, frequently a significant amount of time after they were initially released. Even now, the music continues to reach further than it did when it was first formed. On the other hand, to Barry, the meaning has shifted. At this point, these songs represent more than just accomplishments. Regardless of how long life continues, they serve as reminders of the time that was spent together. Time that cannot be replicated. Consequently, this brings up the issue that he keeps asking himself, even when he is in a state of calm. It is not about celebrity. It has nothing to do with success. On the other hand, it is about recollections, identities, and the meaning of carrying on a story after the individuals who helped you construct it are no longer there. Barry's secret farewell project. In a rare late 2025 interview, Barry Gibb opened up about something he had kept private for a long time. After decades of shaping global music history with the Bee Gees, he revealed he has been quietly working on a personal project built around reflection, memory, and unfinished emotion. It is not a commercial album in the usual sense. It is more like a final conversation between him, his past, and the brothers he lost. The project is said to include unreleased songs and spoken reflections dedicated individually to each of his brothers, Robin, Maurice, and Andy. Each one carried a different part of the Bee Gees' story, and Barry has described the process as emotionally heavy because it forces him to revisit moments he once lived through as a family, not just as a performer. This is not about creating new fame. It is about preserving what time has already taken away. Alongside this, Barry has also spoken about the possibility of one final small tour planned around 2026 to 2027. He did not describe it as a comeback. Instead, He referred to it as a possible closing moment, the last time audiences might hear the Bee Gees' sound performed live in his voice. The way he framed it matters. It is not about returning to the stage for celebration. It is about completing a cycle that began more than half a century ago. What makes this even more emotional is what Barry himself has admitted. Performing without his brothers changes everything. For most of the Bee Gees' history, music was not a solo act. It was a shared identity built between three voices. Now, every performance carries an absence inside it. And that absence is not abstract. It is personal, constant, and unchangeable. Because of that, Barry has been honest about the possibility that this project and any final performances may mark the end of his time on stage altogether. Not because of pressure or industry demand, but because of emotional weight. When a person spends their entire life creating something with others, continuing alone eventually becomes something different. Not just professionally, but internally. The project itself, as described, is less about endings and more about preservation. It is Barry's way of organizing memory into something that can be left behind in a structured form. Songs for Robin, Maurice, and Andy that reflect not just their careers, but their shared history as brothers who built something together long before the world was watching. At this stage of his life, the idea of legacy has shifted. For decades, legacy meant charts, records, and awards. Now, it has become something quieter and more personal. It is about making sure the story of the Bee Gees does not only exist as public memory, but also as something emotionally complete from his side. Whether the final tour happens or not, the intention behind it already marks a clear turning point. It shows a man who is no longer focused on building forward, but on carefully closing what was built across a lifetime. From a childhood that nearly ended before it began, to global stardom, devastating losses, and a quiet life at 79, Barry Gibb has carried more than most could bear. The music he gave the world still brings joy to millions. But for Barry, the silence where his brothers used to be remains the loudest sound of all. What touched you most about Barry's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories like this.